I'm waiting to see. Okay, recording has started. There we go. Okay. And we do have the recording from Tuesday session, by the way. Um, it so the meeting was an hour and a half, and I was looking at the recording today, and the recording was 4 hours long. It somehow kept going because some people didn't exit the meeting at the end, so there were like 5 people. So it just kind of captured their icon sitting on the screen for another literally 2.5 hours before it finally stopped recording. So I trimmed it today, fixed that, and um, we'll find the best way to get that to everyone ASAP. Whether we do a Dropbox or something like that, but we do have it ready to go, and we'll get that to you. But yeah, today Stars Performance Management. It's kind of the the Hyperlift show, but it's going to be. I'm looking forward to this. So yeah, Nick, if you want to just jump on in,
All right.
it's
Thank you, Rex. Thanks for including me on this. And frankly, I'm excited to go through this too. For those of you who know me, there are certain names you call me around data geek and stuff like that. Like it's true. Like I really get into this stuff, and I believe in the whole stars performance management process as kind of an annual approach, and excited to go through a lot of this today. Hopefully we'll have some good kind of back and forth discussion. And Rex, I imagine anyone will let me know if there's anything that kind of comes up in the comments or anything like that that we need to dig into more.
we'll do. Yeah.
Okay. And Nate, Luis, Jess, Josh, Rex, and if you guys want to jump in at any time to kind of break up the monotony of one person talking, feel free. The beauty is, like Rex talked about, we work so closely with RWC Consulting that it's kind of an extension of the team at this point. They understand what we do. We understand what they do. They help us do a kind of refinement, improvement on a lot of this. And, we're very thankful to have that relationship. And I think hopefully it'll come through, as we're going through today. But when we were looking at what do we want to go through, when we think about stars performance management, there are a lot of different components, right? There's to be able to be effective throughout the year, you've got to be able to establish the right foundation at the outset. And so we'll touch a little bit on that. And then understanding how we're actually going to deliver. So once we get that infrastructure in, when we've got our target set, what are the things that we try to look at to make sure that we're staying on top of risks, we're understanding things that come up and being able to address it in a timely fashion. And then there's also a process. When Rex and I were going through this at the beginning, it really was around, how do we leverage dashboards and the like to help execute and deliver on what we're trying to do on all the stars improvement. But there really is more to it than just the dashboards. The dashboard is a great tool, but there are processes around it that need to build in. So we'll touch a little bit on that as well. And please do feel free to stop me or ask questions or comments, as we go. So when we think about the Tukey impact, for those of you who know me, we've probably talked a lot about Tukey this year, but it's worthy of some discussion. So we'll touch on it just for a second, because it really does play into establishing a foundation going into STARS 2025. When Tukey comes in, I think everybody's aware of this, there's going to be a bit of a shock to the system. We're going to see a lot of changes, and just to get this out there, and you guys will let me know if we need to dig into this anymore, but there is a very common misunderstanding right now in market, and that is how the guardrails are going to be applied. So we all know that the guardrails are there, and it's essentially 5 points from the prior year cut points. But just to get this out there, the starting point for the guardrails for STARS 2024 are not going to be the actual cut points that we're seeing for STARS 2023. There's going to be, CMS is going to come in and apply Tukey to STARS 2023. So essentially trying to get an apples to apples comparison between STARS 2023 and 24, where the guardrails actually make sense. So that fact alone, as you're going through it, you'll see it's going to have a significant impact. So when you look at the STARS 2023 cut points, there are going to be several that end up being well beyond 5 points different from what we're seeing in STARS 2023. So again, let me know if we need to dive into that a little bit more, but I wanted to make sure that that was touched on. And to that end, we went in and we applied Tukey to STARS 2023 to see what kind of an impact it would have had on contracts had Tukey been actually applied to STARS 2023. Overall, we saw the average plan dropping like 30 basis points. And, you know, that's a really significant drop. And again, depending on kind of where you fall in the range, you know, between STARS break points, you know, that can cost you half a STARS score. Hopefully, you know, you'll be able to sidestep that, but it is a very realistic thing. And what's interesting, you know, if you think about Tukey, at the beginning, I think there were a lot of a pretty broad understanding that Tukey's going to really impact low performing measures or low performing plans and not so much the hires. And while that is true to a degree, right, you're going to have, it's going to impact the lower performing measures more. It has a bigger impact on the 2 and 3 star cut points than it does typically on the 4 and 5. But it's just a bigger impact. It's not no impact. So, but all of that really plays in. So we broke it out and kind of looked at what was the impact to a score based on your pre-CAI, pre-reward factor STARS 2023 score. And you can see that, you know, there's a pretty clear trend for the most part. If you were in that high performing range, on average, we saw about a 20-point drop, but moved all the way up to 50 and 60 points when you started getting sub 3.25. So, you know, looking at this, it at least can kind of frame some of this, because I included it in this section because I think this is something that should have an impact as you are, you know, hopefully it's already having an impact on how you're treating kind of the balance of this year to, you know, make sure we're getting cushion in for STARS 2024. But it really should have an impact on how you're thinking about target setting as we go into 2025. And so that you'll see some of this play out. Another one, Rex actually asked me to include this one, and I think it's a good one to include. You know, there are some foundational elements as you're establishing the strategy that will ultimately influence everything that you do going forward. And cut points are one of them. You know, if you look at the role that cut points play, right, as the year goes on, it's very significant, and it has an influence on a lot of different things. And therefore, if we are using, let's say, you know, there are groups out there that use prior year cut points. Understand that, because, you know, forecasting cut points is challenging. It's not an easy process, but I think it's much riskier to use older cut points, because as a general rule, cut points are getting more challenging, right? They're going up every year. I would say this year was kind of anomalistic in that we saw a lot of cut points come down. You know, you look at the cap stuff, you look at a number of them, we saw the cut points get easier, but even with that, it being an anomalistic year and we saw more than normal, still 50% of the cut points got harder. So if you're using those older cut points to drive any decisions, to drive any kind of actions that you're taking going forward, I think that there's a lot of risk that you're putting yourself out to. One, anybody who's using cut points for provider incentives, they want to have them hit certain targets so that they can get some bonuses. You run the risk of, maybe not triggering some alerts that you might want to get ahead of so that you could bump that up. You run the risk of paying out incentives where it's actually still hurting what you're ultimately trying to go for. So that's one. And, big one we're talking about today is target setting. And while I'm not a huge proponent of necessarily using expected star ratings to set targets, it does happen. And it's just a logical thing. It's going to happen every time. And so understanding if you're using older cut points, you're not taking advantage of some of the improvement that's going to happen, you are likely to end up with some targets that are probably lower than they should be. And essentially, especially if you're managing to that as the year goes by, you end up coming in with, all right, that's number one, Rex, changes to or much lower star ratings than you were expecting, which ultimately leads to probably the most uncomfortable risk point of ineffective cut point usage is leadership expectation setting. We're all presenting to our leadership teams and kind of laying out at the beginning of the year where we're targeting, where we think we're going to be. As the year progresses, we're doing updates and talking about kind of what we're on track for. And I don't think there's a more uncomfortable conversation than any of us would want to have than having to go back to that leadership team in October and explain why we came in, a half a star's point lower than we were anticipating. So we typically err on the side of conservatism on those things to make sure that we or anybody that we're working with never has to have those kind of conversations. We in fact, some of the people I imagine are on this call right now. Toward the end of the year, we start looking at what the projections look like, and more often than once, we've been told to take some of the projections down so that we're just under the stars score that we actually think that we're going to be, so that we can surprise and delight. So again, a lot of this is just really around making sure that we are operating with the best set of facts that we can and setting appropriate expectations for both ourselves and the leadership team. And as I was putting this slide together, I was listening to a podcast and somebody said, a good plan today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. And that just rang true to me for this. Again, any of us who are putting together cut point forecast, you're not going to be right 100% of the time, but that's okay. It's better to be a little bit more conservative and take a shot than using last year's or something else. And frankly, there are a lot of groups out there that have forecasted cut points. I'm not saying that they're all, perfect and accurate, but they're out there. And if you can get your hands on a few different ones, maybe compare them, see what you're seeing consistent, see what's not. Like I know Novolon puts them out. I know a lot of the pharmacy vendors put some out. We've got them, and so contact Rex or contact us. We're happy to share our stuff if you want to use some of what we're coming together to compare. Was somebody just saying something? Okay. But essentially, the projected cut points that you use have such an impact on everything else that we're doing throughout the year that it's really important to at least put a level of effort into taking a shot at creating a good, if not perfect, plan. And I think this rolls well into kind of an overview of what we believe is an effective target setting practice. We work with a lot of different contracts and have, we're always refining the process that we do. We're learning, we're seeing what could be better. We're talking to new plans and they have ideas, and it's, for a long time, it was a lot of trial and error, like try different things, see what works out. And we think we've got a really good process right now. And just to be clear, you don't have to use us, but we do think that the process works. And so we'll take you through the way we think about target setting and some of the lessons that we've learned over time. And, maybe it's something that you guys can incorporate as you're going through the process. We'll step through each of these as we go, but high level, every contract's unique. Every contract has different situations and a unique set of factors that will create a very contract specific set of risks or challenges or opportunities that really should be considered as you're going into this target setting practice. We put on here to be a collaborative resource, and I'm specifically talking about the STARS team here. You guys are going to have the knowledge around STARS, that nuanced level of knowledge that the measure owners don't always have. And you guys have an opportunity to spend time with other partners and other vendors and create unique insights that can be helpful in this target setting practice. So one of the things that we recommend is going through a really thorough, you could call it a strategic plan, you can call it preparation for target setting, but it's understanding at the contract level, where are we? What things do we need to be thinking about that should actually influence even how we approach target setting once we get in with measure owners? And coming out of that, this is an opportunity to understand what's causing strife, in the measure owner space. Are they focused? Are they seeing things that are impeding their ability to drive improved performance? And ultimately, going through this process, what we've seen is you come out with a really solid set of targets that make sense from a data perspective, and maybe most importantly, are bought into by the measure owners. And that's a critical component, because as we move forward, once we get out of target setting, everything else that we do for the rest of the year is evaluating our current performance and projecting that out and seeing how that relates to targets. So very important that everybody feels ownership around what those targets are. When we dive into the prep, so I'm at that kind of first stage now. Again, the STARS team, you guys have knowledge and insights that not everybody has, and there are things that you can do prior to rolling into the actual target setting process that can be really helpful and beneficial. And I would say that it kind of ranges from the pretty basic to some of the more complex, complicated things, but there are ways to make them simple and straightforward and digestible. So on the basic side of things, there are going to be ways to look at current performance. And when I say current, in this case, I actually mean the STARS 2023 results. There are ways to look at that and just quickly get some insight into measures that we might want to think about specifically in the target setting process, addressing in different ways than we might look at others. From a risk standpoint, any of those measures that were within a couple of points of the lower cut point might be ones you want to put a little focus on. Evaluate where we are this year, see how much change has happened. But if we've held constant from last year and the industry has improved, we're at risk of dropping STARS points there and dropping them, I think, more easily than we might in others where we've got a little bit of cushion. On the flip side, opportunities. So if we are, 1 or 2 points away from the upper cut point, that means we're right there. And as long as we're kind of continuing that push, those should be easier measures for us to be able to take advantage of one higher star rating. So having a different focus applied to those measures as you're going into target setting could be beneficial, both to protect your downside and maybe enable you to harvest some upside. And again, putting this together, I just showed some of the stuff that we put together, but this would be really easy for anybody to do on their own. So we just go in and take a look at all the measures that came out in 2023, evaluate that against cut point proximity, and we highlight the ones that are at risk. So, in this situation, we've got a lot of measures that are either right on the lower cut point or just a little bit above it. And especially, like, even if Tukey wasn't a thing this time, this is going to be concerning, because if we're not seeing improved performance and the industry is, we're seeing that kind of consistent uptick in cut points, these are high at risk of dropping a star rating. So definitely something you'd want to focus on during target setting. By the flip side, here are the measures that we found in this contract that were relatively close to the upper cut point. So again, just something to look at. Are these things that we think that we can maybe get a little bit more aggressive on our intervention activities, bump these things up? It's likely well worth the time and effort to at least discuss those and see if it's something that might work. And please interrupt me. Usually I'm asking any questions, but I realize that we're all on this Zoom call, so just feel free to jump out if there's anything you'd like me to pause or explain a little bit differently.
Yeah, I have a question, Nick.
Yep.
On those last couple of things you were showing, because I noticed at least on the opportunity one, there were no caps measures, and I don't know if there were on the risk one too. Caps, do you look at that differently because the thresholds are so tight, and two points might not feel like much on something else, but obviously it's a lot on caps. Do you have thoughts on the caps measures and these opportunity thresholds?
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that. Yeah, so for this analysis, we actually take out the caps measures, because for the most part, you're going to end up just with a big laundry list of caps measures, because you're kind of always within one or two points of the caps cut point. So that one would be, I would say, a separate analysis. This is going to pull out the things that traditionally have broader cut point ranges.
Okay.
But thanks for bringing that up. One thing that we have started doing a whole lot more, and I think it's likely that some of you guys on the calls have actually already seen some of our peer reports on this, but we think that there's a lot of value in going through a pretty thorough peer analysis. In fact, I was on a call with the customer just before this call, going through a few of them with them. And, these can be really powerful. And one of the ways we look at, there are different peer groups that you can analyze against. Some of the ones that we typically do, just kind of as table stakes, we'll look at where we have similar demographics, like a regional perspective. Maybe we're going to look at all the plans in Virginia relative to you, and that maybe that's one cut. If you're a DSNP, maybe we start cutting it down and looking at specifically DSNPs in that region. Sometimes you are focused on contracts that maybe you lost members to in that year. So we can run them specifically around the ones that truly feel like competitors. And one that I like a lot is kind of an aspirational look. Let's say you got 3.5 stars last year. Well, let's take a look at, let's run it across every contract in market that got 4 stars. Because now this is kind of our aspirational area. We want to be 4 stars or higher. What's driving the difference between how the average 4-star plan is operating versus us? It can highlight areas that that really make sense to target in for improvement. Kind of on a similar standpoint, if you're looking regionally, so knowing that you're going to have a lot of the same challenges if we're looking at relatively, the same group of members, what are we seeing in terms of changes there? Because if you're seeing anything that is kind of a widespread or a wide gap, let's just say, between your performance and theirs, that's going to highlight something that is typically an internal issue. It is not something about, well, this is just kind of what happens in this market. If everybody else is doing something, performing much higher, that's going to highlight areas that you might have some foundational issues that you can go address, but those also should be more addressable and maybe not as challenging to address and actually see some meaningful stars improvement over time. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at, kind of measure set trending. How are we moving over time relative to our peer group? And then diving in and even kind of looking at the specific measures. Is there a certain measure or a group of measures that's really pulling us down here? And it helps to understand where we might want to dig in, just to get a better understanding of our performance and how we might want to address it.
Yeah, hey Meg,
Hey, Meg.
can I make a comment, and then I think we got a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna point out.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, so we had talked about this a little earlier. For those of you who are in growth mode, and I know some of you are, analyses like this, I think are really helpful, and I don't necessarily see it happening as much as I think it should, where you can go into your specific service area, for instance, working with your product team and saying, okay, where is it that we're looking to expand? Where are we going to bid? And take a look at the performance landscape that exists already in that service area, so that you can understand, going into a new service area and peeling members away from the incumbents that are already there. What does their performance look like? What are some red flags that your organization, might need to be aware of well ahead of time when you're planning to go into that service area, so that you can put things into place to mitigate that before you get in. So that's just a thing to think about when you're looking at these peer analyses. Don't just do it looking backward. Do it looking forward for where your organization actually wants to be. Stephen, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, I think it's more of a general comment, because we've done this work before in regards to peer review, and we also obviously have the national average that we get from CMS every year. So we bump it against national average, region, and direct competitors, and do that analysis across the board there, so we can determine, strengths and weaknesses. Basically a SWOT analysis for those three different groups of plans, if you will. In California specifically, we noticed that obviously, probably no surprise to anybody in California, that our CAP scores lag behind the national average in general, because we're a highly delegated market. But that was very apparent from the data, and it continues to be an issue for California plans across the board.
Yeah, we definitely have seen that too.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And is it something that you guys get good value out of and helps kind of inform some of the actions that you take?
Absolutely. It shows where we need to make up a lot of ground, where our direct competitors are also performing very high on, and it kind of sets the table on if a measure is actually difficult, or if it's just a specific challenge that our plan is having. I noticed another thing with California plans, typically do extremely well with HEDIS measures. So like HEDIS is usually trending above the national average. So if you have any HEDIS measure that is below the competitor average, that's a red flag to me. That means we probably need to do extra work there. Whereas CAPS, if our score is low, then as long as we're with our competitors, then we shouldn't be raising the alarms with everybody. So it kind of puts into perspective. It kind of level sets with everybody a little bit. And then one other comment I would make too, for folks that are going through this process that may not know who to compare against. Work with your bid folks. Work with your folks that are doing your bid analysis against competitors to make sure we have competitive benefits. That's usually who I work with to get the list of direct competitors, if you don't already know who they are. And they'll be able to give you all those contract numbers, so you can go and do your homework on that stuff. So it makes it a lot easier.
Yep. 100%.
Great points.
Yeah, and totally agree with you on the national averages thing as well. Like one of the cuts that we look at, it looks at your score, the peer average score, and the national average. Really does give you insight, like you're saying, because maybe your state does struggle, in one measure or another, and it can help to prioritize. Because again, if everybody in the state's underperforming, maybe that's going to be a really difficult lift. If everybody else is outperforming you in the state, maybe it is something that could be more approachable.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things we started.
Thank you so much.
One of the things we started doing this year is putting more of a focus on the percentile ranking. So we went in and created like a list of how do you rank relative to every other contract in market, from a percentage standpoint. What percentage of the plans are you outperforming, underperforming? And that's ended up being a really interesting look that, again, we just came off this call with a customer a second ago, and it's eye-opening when you look at it that way, and when you slice it based on 4-star plans or specific measure sets. I'm not 4-star plans, 4-weighted measures or different measure sets. It really gives you a whole different kind of lens to look through. So I would encourage that. And as I say it, I will offer, we've got a model that allows us to run these peer analysis in a bunch of different ways really easily. And so if you would like us to run something for you, just let us know.
And they really are. I'll just see real quick. We've been in a lot of the meetings where we've been presenting these to when Mick provides them and for our common clients, and they really are insightful. And like he said, they're and like Stephen was saying, right? Just you don't have to use Hyperlist, but the concept is really important. And I love what Nate said about if you're in growth mode and use this to look forward into markets that you're expanding into. But the way this one is set up, it allows you to filter on a lot of different components or elements, right? Not like Mick's saying, SNP status, so DSNP, CSNP, ISNP, state, right, star rating. So a lot of different things, and it's easy to get overwhelmed with all the public stars data. It's there, but unless you're a data scientist or someone really close to that, it's hard to easily navigate that and combine them and correlate them. And so having a tool to be able to do that's been super helpful.
Yeah, and I'll echo again what Rex said. You don't have to use our stuff. These are things you can build yourself. I will say, it took a lot of effort getting this one put together, and it is now really easy. So for us to run it, and I will promise you, if you reach out to us and ask for one of these, we won't start hounding you for sales and stuff like that. This is part of why Rex and I really move forward with this whole Rising Stars concept, is because there's a lot of benefit that we can all have of working together and sharing insights, and that's kind of part of that. So that's my promise, at least right now.
Yeah, and I would encourage anyone who's not working or hasn't already received one of these, right? Because like Steven said, we're heading into bid strategy season, and I do think this kind of analysis, if you're not already doing it yourself, it's going to be really important to help. And actually, even on Tuesday, we did at least a few minutes on bid strategy orientation, right? Like ensuring that whole team is on the same page regarding your overall organizational goals from a stars and risk adjustment and growth and everything else standpoint. And this is an important tool to help orient them around how do we compare with the people that we want to compare ourselves against, right? So it is a really good tool to inform that bid strategy team with.
Yeah, and just so real briefly, this is just one quick cut from it. So you could very easily look at, how are we progressing from STARS 2020 to 23 on a measure set by measure set basis relative to that peer average. Things that we would look for here Are we trending in a less favorable way than the peers are? That tells you something. Are you consistently underperforming where we are? So you look here at pharmacy in this example, we're always pretty far below, maybe a point or so below. And so that's got to tell you something, especially if this is against somebody in your market, right? A group of all the plans in your market. That tells you that you have something fundamental going on, and we need to get ahead of that. HEDIS, you're running about half of what the peer group is. So really does help to kind of prep everything. And as you go into the target setting sessions as well, having this kind of insight will be helpful. And we also just look at it a little bit differently. And so now you're looking at, for STARS 2023, how do we do on a measure set by measure set basis? This is just going to be your average star rating. And then it drills into, all right, but how are we doing measure by measure, our contract, the peer average, and the national average? And, you know, like in this one, you're seeing the highly weighted measures, these meta-adherence ones, we're well underperforming where we are in our region, but we're also underperforming relative to industry averages. So again, should highlight some areas that might be interesting to dive into and put some more focus on. And this last one, we just pulled a few samples out of the peer report to show you, because these are some of the ones I think are interesting. But this is when we start looking at the rankings. And so we have, like, on the actual report, it's on this side, it's the where the top 10, and then here the bottom 10. This is the bottom 10. So looking at this, we've got 4 of them are in the lower quartile, and 8 of them are below 50%. And so you start looking at that and figuring out, it's kind of like all of this stuff coming together creates a really robust, kind of powerful way to look at this stuff. And again, should be very informative as you're rolling into target setting time. I said we went from basic to maybe a little bit more complex. This is probably one of the more complex ones, simply because, not everybody that's working in the STARS games has really nuanced understanding of how QI and reward factor work. And I have not seen a ton of focus on how do you try to optimize these. These are really important, powerful performance levers. And if you can really internalize how to operationalize this and keep this as a focus for your organization, it can reap a lot of rewards. And it might sound kind of interesting to look at QI and reward factor as kind of prep for target sessions, but if you think about it, how you're performing from an overall STAR score perspective can have an impact on where do you focus. If you are kind of on the lower side of things, let's say 3.2 or below that, you probably don't need to spend a lot of time looking at reward factor optimization. That you got a big lift to get there. More important now is focusing on QI. And so you think about how that might impact your methodology or your process around setting targets. I would be less focused on going after any of those big monster wins to get scores way up, and more focused on, how do we do more of a shotgun improvement approach and do maybe some smaller improvements over time that are getting us some star rating improvements, but more importantly, are getting us 5 stars on those 2 5-weight measures. So definitely not saying a sole focus on that, but it should be higher on your list, because you're relatively certain, unless you do some really big improvements overall, you're going to have to use the QI measures in your score. Until you get to 4 stars, you have to use it, right? So that to me would be a bigger priority to me than reward factor. Now, if you are really high performing, got a comfortable cushion in, above 4 stars, then, I start less being concerned about the QI, knowing that it can't hurt me, and more focused on reward factor. And, once you start getting in and helping your team understand the components of reward factor, how it all works, allows you to really target the measures that would help you optimize that potentially 40 basis point bonus opportunity. And, I'll give you an example from some of the stuff that we typically do. So, when we're doing our scorecarding and stuff, we try to include some level of explanation, knowledge, overviews of how everything works. Because again, you're going to have new people coming in, don't always understand some of the more complex stuff. So, high level, you got to have at least a relatively high mean and at least a medium variance to even qualify. So that's what we were talking about before, right? You've got to be typically in that 3.85-ish range at a minimum to even qualify for reward factor. And then it's just how are you optimizing these quadrants? And just for illustrative purposes, we also include, like the thresholds that we typically use. We always go for conservatism. So it's the most challenging thresholds that showed up from stars 2018 to 2021. We don't use 22 because it was more anomalistic, and we'll be folding in the 2023 stuff soon. But for examples, I think it still applies. So like for contract A here, if you've got a 2.89, and I would say this could be your stars 2023, or this could be your current projections for stars 2024, and kind of how are we kind of moving towards the the end of your push and then into target setting. But if you're in this range, you're a long way from getting to that level that would actually trigger you for reward factor. So this would be, for me, I'd be all out focused on QI. What can I do between now and the end of the year? Or how does this help? How does this influence how I set targets? And QI would be my pretty much sole focus. Contract B, now you're kind of on the bubble, right? You're on the bubble of 4 stars. Maybe you have to use QI, maybe you don't. At the same time, you're only 12 basis points away from triggering reward factor. You're already in the medium category, which means you're already qualified from a variance standpoint. And you're only 5 points away from low. And so, you're pretty close to maybe triggering 20 basis points of additional bonus. So in this situation, I'd probably do a bit of a blended approach and pay special attention on maybe where's my low-hanging fruit on the QI side, and what are some really specific measures that I should target to try to also impact reward factor. Contract C, as an example, these guys are crushing it on variance. They're down at 0.58, so they're already in the low category, which is the best. Like not even close to losing that. So you're totally safe there. And for the mean, you're in relatively high. So relatively high in your medium, so you're 10 basis points of, no, I'm sorry, you're low. So you're 20 basis points of bonus right now. But we're only 11 basis points away from going up to high, which again would kick us up another 20 basis points. So at this side, I'm starting to get, to use Rex's words, maniacally focused on how do I impact this mean number? And the beauty of, if mean's what you got to do, you can touch any measure. It doesn't matter. Any measure you can bump up to that next star rating is going to help. Obviously, the higher weighted one's going to do more, but anything you can improve is going to move you in the right direction. And that's slightly different if your contract is in the contract D situation. where you got really high mean, already in the high category. Your variance is in medium. So right now you got 30 basis points of bonus coming, but you're only 5 basis points away from low, which would kick you up to 40. So in this situation, your whole focus ought to be the variance component of reward factor. And just for clarity, what that means is you want to get your variance down so everything is more in line with kind of this 4.36 number. So if you think about what that then means, you have choices to make. And which measures do I want to focus on? Because if you come in and say, all right, I'm going to take this 4 measure, I think I can get it to 5. Great, but your variance just went from a 0.05 to a 0.06. Where in these situations, you want to think about the things that are getting you closer to that 4.36. So starting to look at any measure you might be a 2 or a 3 star in. You get those up, that's going to help. So again, a lot of this is just understanding the nuance here and understanding how you can best optimize to, get the highest scores you can.
Hey, Mick.
Yeah.
Hey, so I had not seen these slides before, and I like this one a lot. I love the way you've laid out the 4 scenarios. There are some people that they're saying they would benefit from a 60-second description or higher level detail. What do you mean by mean and variance? Can you go a little bit 101 on those 2 terms and what they mean?
Yeah. And I'm so glad that question came out, because this is, again, it's exactly why we put stuff like this. And in our bigger picture, it's got a lot more detail. I actually think I have a slide on it, so we'll go into it more in a second. But let me give you one. I'll do the one right now. So the way reward factor works, it's made up of 2 components. You have a mean component and you have a variance component. The mean, pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and it's just essentially the weighted average of all of your measures kind of rolled up into one. So it's like your STAR score, except it doesn't include CAI. So a little bit, for the most part, lower than what you would typically get at the end of the year. So, and the way it's broken out is you have 2 categories, like you see over here, relatively high mean and high mean. And the way those are created is the relatively high mean is the 65th percentile of this mean number. So you look at, the entire industry, where they fall out, and wherever the 65th percentile is, that becomes the threshold for this relatively high mean. The high mean is the 85th percentile. So to get up to the high mean, you have to be performing better than 85% of contracts out there. And when we look at this, that means to get relatively high, and you have one set with QI and one set without QI being applied. So that is something to think about. But bare minimum, you got to get up to at least a 3.86 to even qualify for it. And then the variance component is essentially, if you're 4.36, that would translate to a 4.5. And so if you look at all of your other measures and what is their STAR rating, how far away from that 4.5 are you? And so if you're a 2, you're 2.5 STAR points away. That's going to have a bigger impact, because the variance is much further from where you are. And if you're a 4, it's pretty close. If you're a 5, it's pretty close. So essentially what CMS wants is they don't want your performance all over the map in terms of measure by measure. What they really want is you kind of operating very consistently across the board. And that's why they reward you on this. So the key to impacting variance is getting everything to a STAR rating that's really close to one another. Does that make sense, or just confuse it more?
I think it was great. Yeah. And I'll just emphasize and again, I love the way you've laid these scenarios out here, because like you've said pretty clearly, if you are a reward factor is to benefit plans that are already high performing, right? And that have low variability across all their measures. So if you are 4 stars, 4.5 stars, the way the strategic way to reach the next threshold and to quit flirting with 3.5, and to start flirting with 4.5 and 5 is to go all out on your reward factor, like Nick is saying, and to really understand what's driving it and how you and most plans, at least in my experience, don't have, currently the ability to go through this analysis, right? To know, many plans do, but not all. To understand which measures are influencing the mean and the variance, at that level, and to really be strategic about maximizing their ability to get that 0.4 R factor, which is how most 5-star plans get 5 stars. They get a 0.4 R factor on top of being 4.5 stars already. So it is arguably the most important thing you can do if you're already a high performing plan. And inversely, like Mick was saying, if you're 3 or 3.5, or this year 2 or 2.5, like the 41 plans that are 2 or 2.5, the most important thing you'll probably do, is focus on your improvement measures, your QI, because those are 2 5-weighted measures that, like Mick said, even if you don't reach the next star on a lot of those measures, if you improve 2 or 3 points and you trigger significant improvement and all those add up to get 5 stars on those 2 5-weight measures, you're probably going to jump half a star, right? Like it's really important to get you up to 4 to leverage improvement measures. And yeah, it's this type of analysis that's critical in just really leveraging, or really, optimizing your SARS performance.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rex. And then the final piece is this Tukey risk assessment. And again, this is another one of those things we're happy to run one for you if you want. But we've run a few different looks on this Tukey stuff, especially after the STARS 2023 data came out. And essentially, when you're trying to evaluate the risk, right, and which measures are at risk for STARS 2024 of having negative star rating impacts, even with all your performance remaining exactly the same. That's what we want to highlight because, again, we've got limited resources, we've got limited time. Where do we need to focus to best protect ourselves and make sure that we're giving ourselves the best shot we can to optimize our scores? And so if you look at this, we've kind of broken it into 2 categories. You got the STARS 2023 results. Anything that you had a 2 or a 3-star in, you're at higher risk. Just the way Tukey works, it's going to impact the 2 and 3-star cut points more than the 4 and 5. And so I because we've seen some big movements, 15 points for some of the 2 and 3-star cut points going up. And so anywhere you are in 2 and 3-star, look at that, evaluate, is there anything I can do between now and then, now and the end of the year, to give me a little bit more cushion, so I don't get surprised with dropping to a 1 or 2-star when all this stuff comes out. The other area or lens that we look through are any measures that, even at a 4 and a 5-star range, we're within 1 or 2 basis points of the lower cut point. Because again, while Tukey impacts the 2 and 3-star more, it still impacts 4 and 5 in a lot of cases. And so we've seen this a lot. We have some really high performing customers, and we run these analyses on them. Everything that they lose is in a 4 and 5-star measure. So it's not going to be as impactful, right? You can build back from it if you only have to climb 1 more basis point going forward rather than 15, but it still costs you a STARS point. And so the effect is the same. So take a look at any of those things. And the big thing that I'd be asking myself is, anything I can do between now and the end of the year to impact this? If so, go after it? You know, does this then impact chart chase strategy? You know, if it does, maybe think about that. Because again, with a lot of these things, reward factor, QI, the Tukey stuff, chart chase measures and where you prioritize that can have an impact here. So again, not to spend too much time on this, but just what we're looking at here on that left, we run an analysis to say, all right, which measures did we end up on a 2 and 3 star? So those are ones, you know, maybe you can't impact them, but from a numbers perspective, those are the ones that are at risk, and evaluate, can you do something? Middle column, this is, you know, typically the 4 and 5 measures, 4 and 5 star measures, where we're within a couple of basis points of the lower cut point. You look at this situation, what is that, 5 of them are right on the lower cut points. And so any movement at all without us kind of mimicking that same movement drops us a stars point. And so I would say there's a significant amount of risk for these guys, and there are a whole bunch of 4 and 5 star measures. And then this is like the double whammy. So these are the measures that are in the 2 and 3 star range and within 2 basis points. So if you had to, you know, really prioritize, this is where I would start. And then kind of looking back from there. And again, seeing kind of how all of this stuff plays in together will really be helpful to inform how you move forward, like for the balance of the year, and should be very impactful for target setting as well, because Tukey's here to stay. So if we're losing it this time, now it's time to start climbing that mountain to regain everything. So any questions on that? Okay.
Wait, can I put a finer point on that? I think it's worth emphasizing for folks. The secret to being a sort of stable, high-performing plan, yes, is to push the performance of your measures up as high as they can, but like understanding how all of these things fit together, right? So Tukey, even if you're high-performing, what Mick showed, you know, earlier in this data set, is that those cut points might be shifting around by, I don't remember, like 0.2, you know, like 20 basis points. So how close are you to those high performing thresholds? If those move around and you aren't accurately projecting that internally, are you aiming for the right things to continue optimizing that reward factor as a high performing plan and continue getting that? Or is the shift around those performance thresholds when cut points are so close together already really going to have some sort of unexpected impact where you were banking on getting a 0.4 and all of a sudden you're only getting a 0.2. So I can't emphasize enough, you know, for those of you who are aspiring to high performance and for those of you that are trying to keep a hold of it with your fingers and toes, understanding how all of these pieces fit together and are impacting your own data are really, really essential.
And we have another question, Mick, sorry, from Stephen.
No, I just wanted to get a general assessment on Tukey impacting the overall stars cut points. What's the assessment in regards to how that will impact future cut points? Are future cut points expected to get harder? Are they expected to, you know, just have like the variation between like upper and lower bands and cut points? Like, you know, 2 and 3 stars are going to be a lot higher. 4 and 5 maybe not so much. Like what's the assessment there? I think you guys kind of mentioned a little bit, but I'm just curious on like the high level like summary there.
Yeah, high level summary. I think you captured it well on that latter point that you made. For a lot of the measures, you can see some big movement in the 2 and 3 star, and maybe 4 and 5 hold constant, maybe they go up. And when I'm saying that, I'm saying when you apply Tukey to existing cut points, I'm not incorporating in, you know, kind of the natural progression of cut points from one year to the next. So, in fact, if you want to send me the contract number or numbers we'd be happy to run one of these for you so we can show you what it did to your contract in STARS 2023, because that will give you some insight into what's happening in 24. But ultimately, what creates it is the clustering of the universe of contract scores on a measure by measure basis. So like what we've seen in some of the analysis is, the med adherence numbers, you have a pretty tight band and not a lot of like big outliers. Breast cancer screening, you have a handful of outliers that are really far from that, let's say 60 to 90 pack that you see a lot of the scores in. If you have somebody down here at like a 15, you have somebody at a 25, but then you take those out with Tukey, it changes when you go through the stochastic modeling and all the process you do to establish the cut points, if you take out the outliers, it has the chance to really change the shape. We saw it a lot in the operations measures, call center, complaints. When you start taking out some of those outliers, it fundamentally changes the shape in such a major way that we saw some really big cut point movement. And the beauty is, I actually do think it's going to be good for STARS in general going forward, like starting in 25. I think it's going to be an incredible shock to the system in 24. I don't think that there's a really deep level of understanding across the board on how this is going to work, especially specifically for for your own contract. But I do think it's going to be far more predictable, and analytics teams within the plans are going to get way more powerful starting in STARS 2025, because it's going to be far more predictable. You'll still have the guardrails, and frankly, I'll make a prediction. I'm really interested to see if the guardrails even have any relevance going forward after 24, because if you're taking out the noise, the outliers, it takes a lot to have the entire industry move something up like 5 points. So I'll be very interested to see that. Kind of an off-topic comment. Sorry.
Yeah. To that point, I would say that the increase that we've seen in med adherence, I would feel like that would kind of put a lid on it, the guardrails, because your Kaisers and Uniteds of the world, unnecessary. Well, I wouldn't say unnecessarily, but they don't represent most of the health plans out there that are struggling a little bit more than they are when they're usually like 5-star plans. So I feel like that would kind of put a lid on some of those like increases that we've seen in recent years. So I think everybody was shocked with med adherence, right? So hopefully
every year.
Our assumption is like, okay, guardrails are going to calm that down a little bit, and maybe med adherence will finally start flattening out a little bit because of the guardrails.
Well, I mean, I think how many of us have been saying for like 5 years that, we finally hit that plateau on med adherence. You just can't get more people adherent than that. And it just keeps going up. So yeah, something's got to change.
Mick, you'll probably do this. If you're going to do this at the end, then don't do it now. But for like you were offering to send Steven like a Tukey analysis, but for plans that are interested in a peer review or a Tukey analysis, should we plug like Chay's email into the chat or your email into the chat, or you got a slide on here later that'll kind of give them a contact information?
There's a slide in there at the end that actually is yours and mine, but yeah, go ahead and throw Chay's in the chat. That makes sense.
Okay. Or Chay, if you're on, do you want to do that? Okay, thanks.
Sorry, Chay.
I'll do it. Hi, everybody.
Okay. Did somebody say something?
Chay just said hi to everybody.
Okay. All right. Hi, Chay. And so, you see coming out of that, and I've spent a lot of time on that, but it's kind of how we think about an appropriate way to prep for walking into a target refinement session, and being far more prepared and strategic and thoughtful, as opposed to coming in like, all right, let's kick this up 2 points. There is real nuance to this, to do it effectively and do it well, and really be smart about how do you take advantage of what's realistic, and we have some thoughts about how to be successful in these. And again, use us or not. Like this really isn't meant to be like a sales presentation, but I wanted to show you what we do because we've been doing this for a while and we've learned a lot of different things, and this is one of the processes that frankly I like the most. And so I just want to talk about how this works, why we do it the way we do it, and I've listed a bunch of stuff so that if you wanted to just do this on your own, hopefully this is helpful. And, frankly, even if you had some questions or thoughts or wanted any kind of the models that we use, happy to share them. But we really believe in this process. And so our thinking on this is once you've gone through all of that analysis, one of the key things that you should walk out of that kind of prep with is your view of what maybe a planned and stretch target should be for every measure. And you'll think about a lot of different things in that. You think about where did we see the same measure coming up in a lot of those kind of analyses that we just ran. You think about are there measures, because again, we can't boil the ocean. So are there measures that could benefit from similar intervention strategies so that we can kind of get the best bang for our intervention buck? So a lot of that stuff comes into play. And what we have found to be really successful is we call it target refinement sessions, but we sit down with the measure owners or whomever they want to bring in, and we do a 1 hour facilitated session with CAPS, HEDIS, pharmacy ops. And sometimes we do one with Haas, sometimes Haas is dropped in with one of the other ones. But you really can knock this out in an hour. And what we have found is if you come in with those kind of initial plan and stretch targets, you have a place to start from. It's a lot easier to adjust something than starting from scratch. So we put thought into it, and some targets will go up more than others, but they're for strategic reasons. And so we come into these sessions and we walk through, essentially you'll see this is one of the CAPS ones. So you have a page like this for every measure, right? And we just step through kind of measure by measure, go through all of this detail, and essentially what you're doing with the measure owners is saying kind of here's what we came up with, here's the rationale that we used, why we chose this. But all that said, you guys are going to have knowledge on the ground that we don't have. So like, how does this feel? Are there things that we need to adjust, change? And so going through that process, again, takes about an hour. But when you come out of it, it's great because you have a really solid list of performance targets for every measure that is already supportive of the strategy because you were involved in both and were able to share feedback. But more importantly, it's bought into by the measure owners. And to me, that's the most important component of all of this, because once we get out of target setting, we're often running an execution. We're often running in the scorecards and the dashboards and the tracking and the reporting out of everything. And it's critical that everybody across the organization is bought into this. We can't have people thinking, well, they're saying that, but, we didn't believe that we would be able to hit 82 on that. Everybody has to be bought in. And so the fact that they essentially get final say means we're all on the same team here. We're all accountable. We're all part of this. And frankly, I think it creates a pull. We've seen this. It creates a pull for more information going forward and kind of getting them on board. And how do they become more active in a lot of this and really feel a part of it? This stuff wasn't done to them. It was done with them. And so real quickly, I'll make one thought, and you guys can agree with me or not agree with me. We always suggest that you avoid the non-data driven target setting. And what I mean by that is, we've been in sessions, we'll go through things, and we look at one of the key components is measure movement analysis. So all right, let's take this one. You guys got a 77, let's see. No, you had a 75 last year. So we look at every contract in market that, let's say, was a 73 to a 79. How much were they able to move that measure in a given year? And that's going to give us kind of a range. And so that's what you'd see over here. If you're able to move that 75 as much as the average improving plan, you would set your target at 78. If you were going to be a little bit more aggressive and you were going to move it as much as the top 30% of those plans that we found, you'd set it at 79. And we're not necessarily saying you do that, but we are saying, like, it's meant to bring reality into the thing. Because like what you can see over here, to get up to 5 stars, we're saying that the cut point, you'd have to get to 81. And we've been in sessions that's like, well, we need to be targeting 5 stars, period. So set that at 81. All right, but top 30% weren't able to do that. And we're concerned about setting unrealistic expectations. You probably see it more going from a 2 to a 4 or a 3 to a 4. You really have to understand what's realistic. And our recommendation is don't set targets that are going to be really challenging to hit. You're going to see red all over all of your scorecards throughout the year. And it can potentially negatively impact how you think about everything else, because if you think you got a 4 here, that's bumping your score up. And it's, I think you just want to be as realistic, or I would want to be as realistic as I can be, even if my target is a 2 or a 3. If history has shown me I can't get that high in 1 year, own that and figure out where else we can move it. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
There are a couple of questions real quick, Nick.
Yeah.
Steven saying industry, well, at first as a comment, I guess he says industry historical movement helps too, which I think you have the national averages over to the right there. And then he says, in your experience, what is the average lift you see on CAPS measures year over year?
It isn't high. I mean, to be honest, I can take a look at that after this call and send it to you.
Okay.
I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's not high. 1 to 2 points, I think. That would be my guess based on just kind of remembering what some of this stuff looks like. I think flu moves more than the other ones. But
He says he was seeing 1 to 2 points as well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's a realistic starting point. Yep.
Sorry, and then Jessica Asaf is asking, is this measure target analysis already included in our Stars Monitor suite, or is it an additional package for purchase?
For new plans, it's going to be extra, Jessica. No, it's included. This is, everything that we're going through today is all included in that package. And okay, so real quickly, again, kind of tight on time, so I'll just go through this. What I wanted to do at least is, in case we don't talk again, here are some of the things that I think is beneficial as you're going. And I ran out of space, so I just threw this in kind of last minute. But realistic measure movement analysis, I'd say that's the only one that if you're doing this yourself is hard. That's kind of a whip to create. But it is doable. If you have an analytics guy who knows like Python or some of those things, they can do it easily. Some of the things that we've seen in the past that we have included on something like this is the CAPS one, so it's not really the same. But if you have the additional members required to achieve the target, so like sometimes we'll put in here, last year, based on, we got a 78, and that means we got 10,000 members, were compliant. And if we're setting the target now to this, that means we have to go to 13,000. And what it does is kind of brings in a little bit of reality, kind of brass tacks to, you're talking to the people that are actually going to be doing this work. So like, yeah, I understand you want to go from a 78 to an 81, but that means you got to, close 3,000 more gaps than you did last year. Are you really comfortable with that? Because again, we're trying to get to reality and not just going after numbers because it feels like that's where we should be. Let's talk about what it's actually going to take. Starting point measure. What did I say there? See, I knew I shouldn't have just thrown that in there at the end. I'll come back to that one. We always want to have the forecasted cut points, the projected cut points in there. We include them here, just show you like kind of here's where you are in that range, because understanding the proximity is helpful. How close are we to the bottom, how close we are to the top. Historical trend performance is great because you can see, are you moving one way or another? Are your targets like way out of whack from anywhere you've been? And if so, okay, but walk me through what it is we're doing that's going to be way out of whack from everything we've done in the past to show that. Projected QI movement. So we always include this here, and it's just such an important component, we believe, to really to manage stars at a sophisticated, really optimized level. It just has to be part of the equation. It doesn't have to drive everything. But trying to get ahead of that is kind of always a good goal, not required on anything. Industry and peer averages, those are, I think, always good to have. Really just helps to understand maybe the level of effort that you go into it. And then any kind of the other considerations that were gleaned when you went through that whole the prep stuff that we were just talking about, because as you can imagine, there'll be all kinds of things that come out of that. And finally, we like to include the historical cut points, because especially when you're talking about projected cut points, you'll have people that'll be like, well, that doesn't make sense. I don't think it's going to do that. So at least we can take a look back and see what we've seen historically. Gives you a sense of how realistic some of the stuff is, or if we want to dive deeper into something. So does all that make sense? Any questions on that?
I just want to take, so you got 7 minutes left, but just want to take 15 seconds here and say, we use this a lot on our common clients. We're typically the ones who are kind of walking through this exercise a lot of the times, and I find it incredibly well put together and really informs the conversation. And if you're so it takes about an hour for every measure set. So if we're on a call with all the CAPS measure owners, we walk through every CAPS measure. And on this one specifically, like the kind of conversation is typically like, okay, we were 72, we jumped to 79. How do we do that if we don't know, right? And we have that conversation. Is it possible to, or then we fell to 75, right? So now as we're looking at next year, what's more realistic, 75, 79, somewhere in the middle? Is 79 still, we've been there before, so we know we can do that, but was there something unique about that year that made that possible? Do we have benefit reductions and maybe can't get there this year? But it just really informs that whole conversation with the measure owner and the STARS team around, what's realistic, like Mick was saying. So I really like this, the way this is structured a lot.
It really is. It's a good process. And again, you get them bought in. And one thing I didn't mention, I won't say that we do this every time, but every time we do it, I'm happy we did it. And I would highly recommend it. As you're going through this, ask them, all right, you just said we're going to target 79. Is there anything that we need to put in place to help bridge that gap? Anything that right now is hindering you from going after any kind of significant level of performance improvement? Could be just internal process change. It could be just better utilizing the internal resources that exist. Could be a new piece of technology. Could be leading practices. So like a lot of the stuff when we're doing these sessions, I like it when, Jess, Luis, Rex, Nate join us on this, because they're going to have a different perspective sitting in the chairs that they've sat in the past. And so they can talk about what other plans are doing to see and have seen success here. and I've got another story, but given the time, I'll skip it. But there is a lot of value in bringing in outside expertise. Like if you think back to some of the peer things, where our HEDIS stuff was like half of what the average of our peers were, I'd think about bringing somebody from the outside in, somebody who's going to ask some questions, have some discussions, because I would guarantee at that point, things will come up that can drive some immediate improvement, and it doesn't always have to represent additional spend or additional vendors. But if it does, there's probably a good ROI that can be created for that. But ultimately, that's something that can be really helpful in terms of giving you an absolutely solid starting point in terms of targets, which is going to be what we're going to be measuring everything against going forward. And again, more importantly, they're bought in, the measure owners themselves. And I did move that to the front. So it was starting point, measure targets. And that was the point. Just as you come into this, make sure that you have targets that you'd like to go with, because it's a great way to kind of seed the conversation. And we have 4 minutes. And so let me just kind of figure out how to push through this real quick. Some of the things that we like to look at: early warning signs. How do you stay on track and get, we always want to make sure that you're getting information early on so that you have time to address it. So this is one of those slides that we put out here for this. And so all this is showing you is, here are the measures across the board that are underperforming this month relative to this month last year. And, not necessarily saying that there's a huge issue that needs to be addressed here, but there could be. And so it's worthy of a discussion. Plans make timely decisions about appeals. Why are we 11 points different? Is something changing? On some of these, is it a timing issue? Is the supplemental data collection different? Ultimately, it doesn't matter if it's kind of real or not. What really matters is that we understand, that we have a good understanding of how everything is operating, and we know which ones we need to go after and which ones we could ignore. That's kind of the point. And the other side, I think this can be really powerful. This is showing you, all right, plans make time decisions about appeals. Every measure that right now is projected to miss target, here's how much it's costing your overall score. If we were able to get this one back to the target star rating, we could add 13 basis points to our score and on down the line. So really just helps to understand how far off we are in terms of ultimate year-end projections and what is it costing us. So where should we be focusing? I'll push through some of these because I want to get through the rest of this. I got a handful of more slides, but at least get everyone exposed to it. Rex talks about glide path a lot. And to me, it's all about, who are we building this for? What do they need to be ultimately successful? Some people like to look at a glide path, which is like this orange line. So for us to hit our target, based on our contracts, kind of historical trends on how we move each month for this measure, these are the numbers that we'd have to hit to be able to kind of track with historical consistency in terms of month-to-month trends and hit our target. So right now you can see, like, we're down here, our glide path is here. So we got a bit of a gap. We're right now not, and that shows up here. We're not projected to hit our target. So something needs to happen, or you need to tell me that it's a timing issue and not to worry about it. But that's one way people like to do it. Another time, people maybe like to look at, how many gaps do we close between now and the end of the year? How many gaps do we need to close to reach our target? Okay, so we're looking at, like, I got to close 4 times more gaps than I did last year. So just kind of smiling and acknowledging and saying, yep, we got to get moving on that. That's not going to do it. I need to hear action plans. I need to hear specifically, what are we going to do? How are we going to measure this next month? It's just meant to kind of drive action and make people accountable. Oh, it's 12:30. Oh my gosh. All right, so I need to stop, I suppose, Rex?
Probably so, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for letting me kind of go through this with you. And yeah, Rex, and this is also one where we were saying, well, we can do any of this stuff if you'd like, but here are emails. And so if you'd like to kind of talk through anything, if we can answer any questions on all of that stuff, just shoot me an email, and happy to connect.
Good stuff. Yeah, I think we'll have some follow-ups with a few people maybe, but on some of the questions, but that we can't get to. But yeah, really, Mick, that was great. I thought it was really, really well done, and great overviews on kind of what good performance management looks like. So so yeah, we'll share the deck, right, Mick?
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
PDF it and shoot it over to you.
We'll share the deck. We have the recording. We'll share, and yeah, Mick's contact information is in the deck, as you saw. Che works with Mick. Che's contact information is in the chat, if you saw that too, if you want to send a quick note asking for a peer review or a Tukey analysis or anything else he had on that slide. So yeah, if I know we're over, so we'll let you go. Thanks everyone for participating. We will be back on the 15th. Another calendar invitation on the 15th and 17th. We'll be updating with more detailed agenda topics very soon. But the first one is on culture. Second one is on voice of the member and kind of member experience and CAPS. So really looking forward to those. Thanks for everyone participating today, and have a great rest of the week.
Yeah, thanks
Mick.
everybody.